Welcome back. We're going to look at the third part in this series, which is on risk management. Now you'll be able to appreciate that there's a lot of risk which is involved in any case in the system. Moreover, the exchanges gives a lot of exposure on the basis of certain margins, which also add up to the risk. So what we'll do is that we'll just try and divide the whole chapter into two parts. One is going to be on the study of margins, and the other is going to be the study of the roles of various parties in risk management. Risk management in itself is a very broad topic and a very exciting topic, but we would be just sticking to the very basics that are being shared from the NISM currency derivatives point of view, and not really going into the detail. Otherwise it's a very exhaustive topic and a very interesting topic. But from the margins point of view, let's look at the margins which are involved first, and then we'll perhaps look at the rules, right? So in margins we'll be looking at the margins that have to be maintained by the clients. So we're looking at some kind of initial margins that we'll look at. We'll also look at some kind of portfolio margins, which is again an aggregate kind of a situation. So let me just write down portfolio margins. We'll look at calendar spread margins, portfolio margins, and we'll also maybe look at the extreme loss margins. Right? Please do remember that the initial margin and the extreme loss margin, which is the 1 and the 4th in our case, are maintained through the liquid net worth of a clearing member. So what I'm saying is, before we go on to margins, I'm just saying that the initial margin and extreme loss margin, are maintained by the clearing member, and a clearing member has to maintain 50 lakhs at all points of time, excluding the margins, that the initial and the extreme loss. What are the initial and the extreme loss? We'll just cover. But just before we go any further, I just wanted to reiterate the fact and kindly remember this, that initial margin and the extreme loss margin are maintained by the clearing members from the liquid net worth, right? So this is also very important, liquid net worth. And liquid net worth at all points of time is 50 lakhs, right? So what we'll do now is we'll quickly look at these margins one by one, right? The initial, portfolio, calendar spread, and extreme loss. Coming to the initial margin. So a client needs to maintain initial margin, right? And initial margin if he wants any kind of exposure. Now let's just have a understanding of how an initial margin is calculated. Now what we do in this is we look at the worst case situation that is possible across the contracts, or the maximum loss, I'll say the worst case possible across contracts. So right, so that is what we are looking at, but this has to be at a certain confidence level of the market, right? So what we are saying is, at the current confidence level, the maximum possible loss which is possible across the contracts is called the and a percentage of that will be the risk that is there, right? So what we do is this is on the basis of something called, very commonly you might have heard, but would have wondered what it is. It's the VAR, or the value at risk. So value at risk phenomena basically looks at the maximum possible loss which is across contracts at the current confidence level of the market, right? And that is what it is. For our perspective and from the NISM perspective, all we need to remember from a VAR perspective, because a VAR discussion would be beyond the scope of the series, but all you need to remember is that what we are going to do is we are going to calculate losses at various price ranges. So what they do typically is they look at, let's say, price 1, what is the possible loss, what is the loss. They look at price 2 and understand what is the possible loss. They look at price 3 and they'll understand what is the possible loss, right? Now you might be wondering that it is not possible that for all prices that this loss is taken out, which is naturally not possible. For example, if the current price is 40, it is not possible that we try and figure out the loss for all prices at 39.8, 39.7. So it's not really possible. So what they do is they keep a standard deviation, and the standard deviation is fixed in this case at 3.5 of the current price, right? So initial margin is nothing but a percentage of VAR, right? So an initial margin would be basically VAR, value at risk. What is the maximum possible loss which is possible across the contracts at the current confidence level of the market, right? And then what you do is you try and calculate the losses at various price ranges. And because it is not possible to calculate losses at various price ranges, the standard deviation is fixed at the for example, if the current price is 40, the standard deviation is fixed as 3.5 of the current price, right? So this is how a VAR will be calculated, and the initial margin is a percentage of that. So if you want to know the initial margin on the first day of currency contract is 1.75%, right? So I'll just take the liberty of making another arrow on the first day, and on the subsequent days it is 1%. I hope it's absolutely clear, right? Initial margin is a percentage. So I've just tried to explain you in very simple terms what's the concept of VAR, and the initial margin is nothing but 1.75% on the first day and 1% on the subsequent days, right? So kindly just make a note of this slide, because a lot of questions can come from this concept, although they will not go into the detailing of VAR, which is in itself a very big concept to understand. Let's also now look at the second risk that we were talking, which was the portfolio based, right? So let's look at risk 2, which we said the client must have looked at the portfolio based. Again, from the NISM perspective, we are not going to go into great details. All we need to remember is that the aggregate view of risk, right? You would have understood from the word portfolio itself that we are going to talk of the aggregate view, and this is the total risk involved, aggregate view of the total risk involved across all future contracts of a client at various maturity dates. So another very important thing that we need to remember, a portfolio based risk would basically look at an aggregate view, that is the total risk involved across all future contracts of a client at various maturity time. And this is done with the help of something called a span. So a span is nothing but standard portfolio analysis of risk. Standard portfolio analysis of risk. again, discussing span in great detail would be beyond the scope of this series. But what you need to understand is, if you've been able to understand how the individual risk is calculated, so portfolio based risk is also calculated with the help, it's basically an aggregate view, and it's calculated with the help of span, right? So that is all that is there to understand in the current thing. We'll quickly look at the last two kind of margins that need to be maintained. So we look at number 3, the calendar spread margin. Calendar spread margin. Now, what was a calendar spread? If you recall, a calendar spread was basically one futures position was hedged by another position at a different maturity, right? If you recall, one futures position, let's say on X date, is hedged with another future position on, let's say, X plus 7 days. Example, right? So this is just an example. So on one particular date hedged with another particular date, right? That is what a calendar spread was. Now the margin which has been fixed for a calendar spread, so a margin for calendar spread which has been fixed is rupees 250 for all months of the spread. Rupees 250 for all months of spread. So you can just recall it and keep it with you, keep this fact with you, that the margin on a calendar spread is rupees 250 for all months of the spread, right? And naturally it will be applicable till expiry of the near month contract. So if X date is the near month contract, this is applicable till expiry of near month contract, right? So another important thing that you need to, so in our case, which is X date, so this is applicable till X date, right? So that's the third margin that we're looking at. So we're looking at the portfolio based, we've done the calendar spread, we've done the initial margin, right? We've done 3 kinds of margin. The only fourth one which is left is the extreme loss margin. So let's quickly look at the extreme loss margin also. So the extreme loss margin of a client is basically, let's say divide it into 2 parts. One, I'm talking of a normal open position. So 1% of the MTM of open position, and the other is naturally, because this is normal open position, the other can be of a calendar spread. So in case of a calendar spread, it is 1/3 MTM value of the far month contract. Right? So the extreme loss margin that needs to be kept is 1% of the MTM of the open position, and in case of a calendar spread, let me just say calendar spread. So we are looking at extreme loss margin in terms of calendar spread. It is 1/3 MTM value of the far month contract. So it's quite simple. I mean, if you look at it, please do not go, you don't have to really get into the real nitty-gritties of these margins, because these are in any case very exhaustive topics and require deep understanding. But from the point of view of the examination, NISM examination, what we've just covered would be more than enough and sufficient. So what I have to do now is also talk on the roles of the various parties in risk management, that I would like to take in the next video.